Hello everyone, good to see you. Salam. You're all very welcome today to the daily press briefing, press conference of the COP presidency. In terms of the running order, we will begin shortly with opening remarks by COP29 presidency lead negotiator, Yalcin Rafiev, then followed by UNDP Administrator Achim Steiner and UNCTAD Secretary General Rebecca Greenspan, both of whom are co-leaders of the Baku Initiative for Climate Finance, Investment and Trade Dialogue, a key COP29 presidency initiative. The WTO have also been involved in the development of these initiatives, and we are joined by Ike Hoe Lim, Director of Trade and Environment Division at the WTO, who can also take a few questions. But let's start with the lead negotiator. It's your floor, Mr. Rafiev.
Thank you, Alexander. Hello, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this press conference. Before taking questions, I want to provide you a brief update on three major topics. First, I will give a brief overview of progress made at the World Leaders Climate Action Summit. Second, I will comment on the negotiated agenda and our top priority, the NCQG. And the third, I discuss the third thematic day of COP29 on finance, investment and trade. The World Leaders Climate Action Summit was an important opportunity to provide political direction for the next 2 weeks. 80 national leaders, including heads of state and government, participated in the summit to build consensus and momentum for the climate action. And we made a special effort to ensure that the voices of small island developing states were heard at the highest level with a special leader-level event. We heard from the communities on the front lines of climate change impacts. They provided powerful testimony on what real people stand to lose from the climate crisis. They spoke of the irreversible losses they are already suffering. They remind us of the importance of delivering on our plan to enhance ambition and enable action. And they demonstrated that success does not depend on one country alone. It requires a collective effort. The summit gave us all firm political direction. It's now time for the delegations to deliver. On the negotiated agenda, we have continued to build on the early progress on Article 6.4, and we are developing momentum across the COP29 negotiations agenda. In particular, we are focused on delivering a fair and ambitious new collective quantified goal, our top negotiating priority. Here at COP29, we have been working closely with the co-chairs of the contact group on NCQG, Fiona Gilbert of Australia and Zahir Fakir of South Africa. We are grateful to them both for their hard work and dedication throughout the year. We encourage the co-chairs to produce the first iteration of a draft decision text as early as possible at COP29. Parties welcome the decision to transition to a draft text and describe it as a workable basis for discussion for the first time in a 3 years technical process. This is a significant step that will guide conversations around potential landing zones and help to identify and address concerns. But the draft text needs to be streamlined further. There are still many options to be resolved, and we expect to hear many different views. We want to hear everyone's reactions, and there will be spaces for them to provide their inputs throughout COP29. But the parties must remember that the clock is ticking, and we only have 10 days left. They must use this precious time to talk to each other directly and take ownership of building bridging solutions. Finally, today marks the beginning of our thematic programming with Finance, Investment and Trade Day. This morning, Sweden pledged 8 billion krona, or $730 million to the Green Climate Fund, and we warmly welcome their contribution. We also held the launch event for the Big Fit Dialogue, an important part of the COP29 presidency's action agenda. This dialogue will bring together successive COP presidencies, international financial institutions, and the private sector. It aims to improve alignment and identify new policies that can deliver progress on climate, finance, investment, and trade. Today, the high-level champion, Nigar Arpaderai, is hosting the COP29 Business, Investment and Philanthropy Climate Platform. This event will bring together 1,100 leaders from the business, finance and philanthropy communities. It will give them a platform to discuss both what they need from governments and the solutions that they can bring to addressing the climate crisis. We want them to send a strong signal to all actors that the private sector stands ready to commit to climate action, and today is their chance to step up. At the event, a group of pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, family offices and foundations will announce a new collaboration to accelerate the deployment of private finance into climate and sustainability solutions. This partnership has over $10 trillion in combined assets under management, reflects the intensive engagement between these organizations and COP29 high-level champion throughout the year. Ladies and gentlemen, we have made a strong start. We have already delivered significant wins, from loss and damage to carbon markets. The progress we have made will make a real difference to real people. Now is the time to drive forward this momentum. Thank you for your time. I now hand over to my colleagues from UNCTAD and the UNDP. Please, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And next speaker is Achim Steiner, please.
You want to go first? Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Rafiev and our colleagues in the UNFCCC. It's a pleasure to address you here. And let me add perhaps a little bit of a perspective from the vantage point of the United Nations Development Programme, whose daily bread and butter is to work alongside countries in actually implementing their NDCs, mobilizing financial resources for investing in the energy transitions, in mitigation, adaptation, and also in building the pathways for a transition towards a greener economy, a low-carbon economy that is not simply a climate change objective, but is actually a development objective. And I think increasingly also in our work, including the Big Fit discussion this morning, we saw the recognition that climate change is increasingly not just a driver for investment in bringing down emissions, it's actually an investment in the development pathways, the economies, the commodities, the services, the infrastructure on which countries will thrive over the coming decades. It is difficult sometimes for the public and maybe even for some of you to follow the numbers game. And, you know, a lot of numbers are obviously circulating in these discussions, and no one else than the chief negotiator is experiencing the challenge of these different lenses that are being applied here. What I would like to perhaps add a little bit of perspective to also allow the negotiations not always to engage in what sometimes in these COPs becomes a zero-sum game. If one person gives more, that person has lost something and the other person has gained something. Climate finance has long transcended this kind of equation. Let's first of all acknowledge that when parties are negotiating here in Baku between $100 billion and a $1.3 trillion sum of investments, that these are not numbers that should sound extraterrestrial to some. Just go back to the IEA that estimates that this year alone, total investment in new energy infrastructure will be around $3 trillion just this year, of which in fact $2 trillion will be in renewable energy infrastructure. So this just gives you a sense that when we are talking about $1.3 trillion for developing nations to be able to accelerate their transitions, their investments, their ambition in the nationally determined contributions that are next year at the COP, essentially being put forward to demonstrate that the Paris Agreement with its pathways holds, then these are not unreal or surreal sums. In fact, we have spent trillions over the last decade already in investing in the energy transition, which explains why so much of the world's electricity in 2024 is already being produced with cleaner and often zero emissions technologies. Secondly, in these negotiations, it is also important to remind ourselves that developing countries are already investing hundreds of billions of dollars of their own taxpayer public revenues in climate change, whether in adaptation, because with every disaster, enormous sums of money are being redirected and repurposed in essentially just staying in the same place and recovering, not investing in the future of infrastructure, modernization, education, but also in mitigation. Latin America's track record of now producing 60% of its electricity with renewables didn't just come out of nowhere. The investments that are happening in India today, going from 200 gigawatts of renewables to over 550 gigawatts just in the next 4 years. This is probably the single largest, fastest investment in renewables in human history. And maybe surprising to some of you, if you take China and India together, half of humanity, if you want, most of what they have invested in, renewables, cleaner energy and so on, is not financed by taxpayers from the north. It has been financed, first of all, by, yes, taxpayers from their countries, and secondly, private sector, businesses, capital markets. And this is where much of the discussion that will happen over the next few days needs to find a credible formula where the public finance element is sufficiently robust in order to raise on top of that the multiplication of private finance. And the opportunities are enormous, despite also, yes, setbacks and mixed signals that make markets nervous. But the story of these investments over the last 5 to 10 years has not only been one of growth, it is one of exponential growth. And therefore, my hope remains that in the negotiations here, as you also just pointed out, Mr. Rafiev, parties can see beyond the immediate arithmetic of a chessboard. This is actually an opportunity to co-invest, and whether it is through the public concessional finance core, that is particularly essential for least developed countries, the most vulnerable countries, small island developing states, because they cannot, out of their own capacity, make these critical, pivotal investments. It is also why Africa, for instance, is so vocal at this COP here, because this remarkable $3 trillion that the IEA expects as investments in 2024, colleagues, less than 1%, roughly, actually found its way onto the African continent, where the vast majority of those citizens, over 600 million, live today who have not even got access to any form of modern electricity, the fundamental driver of development. These are the correctives that we are trying to address in a global collective financing goal for climate change that ultimately is also an investment in development, and a development where we can mobilize significant private capital, but we have to create the right conditions. Perhaps a last reminder, because it is often forgotten, people ask, where is that money going to come from? Particularly in those countries that, yes, may have to put some money into the kitty. Let us remember that the world still is spending hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies for fossil fuels, extraction and consumption. The IMF estimates that the total economic or financial impact of these subsidies is now around $7 trillion. We don't even need to find new money. We just need to take some of the money we're spending on artificially making fossil fuel consumption cheaper or extraction profitable and direct it towards the kind of climate finance economy that we are negotiating here in Baku. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I hand over to Secretary General Greenspan, please. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the lead negotiator for his remarks, and thank you to the presidency of COP that together with the UNDP and UNCTAD is launching this big fit initiative, the Baku initiative on climate, finance, investment, and trade. And as both of my colleagues were saying before, you know, the fight against climate change is in a pivotal moment. The science is clear, the urgency is undeniable, and the window for action is closing if we really want a better life for the majority of the population of the world. And in the middle of all that, we need to have policy coherence, and that's what this initiative is about. We need that what we do in trade is not against what we do in climate, and what we do in financing is not against what we do in trade. So we need trade, finance, and climate policy to come together. And as we say very often, trade has to be part of the solution, not a problem, but part of the solution. So here we have also our colleague from WTO and ITC is are also supporting this initiative. Now, why do we say this? And I think that Achim said this very well. You know, the finance that is getting to the least developed countries, to the small countries, to the most vulnerable countries is very little. You know, if you take the direct investment or the foreign direct investment into these countries in the renewable, as Achim was saying, for example, for renewable energy, these countries are receiving, Africa is receiving, you said, between 1% and 2% of the total foreign direct investment that is going to renewable energy. And so obviously something different has to happen for the countries where the investment is needed most to be able to attract this investment. And for that, we have always said that we need a reform of the international financial architecture. We need the multilateral development banks to come in, to take more risk, to crowd in private investment, and to be able to direct these resources to the countries that need them most at the right cost. Because part of the problem that we have in most of the developing countries is that they can finance themselves at very high interest rate, at a very high cost of capital. And the high cost of capital is an impediment for these countries to really make the green transition happen and the investments that they need happen. We know that the needs of investment for the sustainable development goals of the developing world has gone up, not down. When we started in 2015, we needed $2.5 trillion in investment. Now we need $4 trillion in investment. And the most we delay the action, the more costly and more expensive it will be. But let's go to trade, for example. And here we were saying today that also we have trade practices that perpetuate unsustainable patterns. For example, clean energy technologies face tariffs that are on average 2 times as high as those that affect fossil fuels. So Achim is absolutely right. You were talking about subsidies, you know, 7 trillion according to the direct and indirect effect of subsidies on fossil fuels, but also in trade. We have higher tariffs for clean technologies than for fossil fuels. So we don't have a leverage, a playing field for the new technologies to really thrive. And we need this green transition also to dynamize growth. Because right now, the world is in a new, what we call a new low normal, where growth is below 3%. And that's not enough to fight poverty and inequality in the developing world. So if we want to dynamize growth and have higher and sustainable growth, we need trade and investment, and we need the green transition to really make this happen. So that's why we say trade, investment, and finance has to come together. We have to have a policy coherence framework that will make these 3 very important elements for the future of the global economy to really look for the synergies and allow the developing countries to thrive and grow appropriately. Now, what are we going to do within the big fit? So in our case, UNCTAD will work with the sustainable investment community including sovereign wealth and public pension funds, green bond markets, and sustainable stock exchanges to ensure that their many trillions in assets under management can play a role in achieving the SDGs and ensuring sustainable energy for all. And so we will work on the trade side to make trade part of the solution, and we will work on the investment side to really be able to have a sustainable investment, the investment community to come together. But one of the things that we have to fight, and I want to make this my last point, is that we need to bring back trust in the sustainable funds. You know, one of the things that we discovered in the World Investment Report of last year, in 2023, is that the sustainable funds saw a decline of 60% of new funds. 60% decline of new funds coming into the sustainable funds. And why? Because the investors lost trust that the sustainable funds were really sustainable, that their investment was not greenwashing, but was really going to the green, to the right places and the right sectors. So we need to fight greenwashing. We need to bring back trust. We need to bring back the knowledge of what is happening in the investment community, and we need to strengthen the trust of the investors in the sustainable funds so we can work with them and make those funds go to the right places where they are needed most and to the right sectors that really will help to bring the green transition that we are all talking about here in COP29. So again, thank you very much to Azerbaijan for bringing us together for this initiative, and let's work together to have policy coherence and to help those parts of the world that cannot make it happen alone, but need the solidarity and the cooperation with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. We now open the floor for a few questions. If you could please identify yourself, your media organization, and please wait for the microphone because we have colleagues joining online so that they can understand your question. Let me start, second row, the gentleman in the red pullover.
Thank you. Damien Carrington from The Guardian. Question for Mr. Rafaev. You mentioned in your opening remarks that parties had said that the current text for the NCQG was workable. I mean, we've been told by Annex 1 parties off the record that it's actually unworkable. I mean, can you sort of tell us how big a problem there is to solve there, please? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as you know, the text that that is currently on the table is a product of 3 years of hard work that the parties have been have been engaging in a inclusive process. And there is no alternative to this text, and everybody understands that there cannot be in the remaining 10 days any alternative text that can be produced which have the same legitimacy as this document. Therefore, of course, there are some diverging views. There are some points that need still to have the convergence on, and this is exactly why the multilateral negotiation process exists, that to bridge the gaps and find the solutions. So therefore, we are expressing the prevailing idea and the prevailing atmosphere, the spirit within the room, which is everybody understand that this is a text that is a product of the ad hoc work program, and but with some iterations, with some, of course, streamlining, narrowing down options, this text could be a good starting point for continued negotiation process. Thank you.
Thank you. The lady in the second row on the other block.
Hi, thanks. Victoria from Sky News, the UK. I've got a question for Mr. Rafiev as well. Argentina walked away from COP29 yesterday. Are you worried about any other countries following suit, especially in the context of the US election? And are you worried about the COP29 process in general because of that?
Thank you for the question. This matter is actually a bilateral matter between Argentina and the UN, and I cannot further comment on this matter, and I would like to propose that we stick to today's thematic theme, which is finance. Thank you.
But it does affect the process if there's a country missing. So what does the presidency make of that? Are you concerned or not?
I think I've been clear in my answer that we would rather focus on the topic of today.
The gentleman in the same block, 5th row, approximately, just behind you. Yeah.
The question is for Mr. Rafiev too.
Could you please identify yourself first?
Laurent Thomé with Agence France Presse. President Aliyev yesterday, his criticism of France caused the French environment minister to cancel her trip here. His words about oil being a gift from God also raised a lot of eyebrows here. Do you think the president's words this week are having a negative effect on the climate finance negotiations? And what can you say about the French minister's decision to cancel her trip and how that also affects the negotiations? Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. President has been quite clear on his message, and I don't want to comment on or interpret on this statement. But in terms of French ministers' intention not to come, the host country, Azerbaijan, has made sure that we have the inclusive process here. We have hosted more than 80 leaders, world leaders. Here we have hundreds of ministers attending, and we have ensured that all the negotiation process is inclusive. We have opened our doors to everybody to come to engage in very constructive, fruitful discussions. Our doors are still open, and we hope that all who are attending here have only one intention: to come to join us in this collective effort to get an outcome that is a positive and that will be helping mainly the developing countries to be meeting their needs and priorities. Thank you so much.
Let's go on the other side, the gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. Sebastian Rodriguez from Climate Home News. I wanted to ask for Mr. Rafiev on the Climate Finance Action Fund, which was proposed a few months ago as an option to mobilize private finance from oil producers. I was wondering if the fund would be launched during COP29, and if the presidency has faced any hurdles in sort of getting that running. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, Climate Finance Action Fund is one of our 14 presidency initiatives. When we announced it, we have been clear about the process that we want to proceed with. We have established it with a participation, with an intention to create an innovative source of funding for developing countries with an innovative concept. But at the same time, in order to ensure the inclusive process of concept development, we have decided to include also potential donor countries into the working group that we have established to work out a concept that would be workable, that would be acceptable for them to join. So therefore, at this COP, we have announced that the working group that we have established is working on the concept paper, to have a detailed concept paper, because this is a very complex process to establish a new fund that will need some time, but we are on it and we are working closely with all potential donor countries. We have seen a great interest by the potential donors from both developing countries, from the developed countries, from the public sector and the private sector, that encourage us to continue this work in a way that we can establish and operationalize the fund as soon as possible. Thank you.
Mr. Ike Holim, would you like to add anything from the WTO?
Well, maybe I'd just say that, you know, the comments by Secretary General UNCTAD and the administrator from UNDP were really very clear on the role that trade can play as a solution to the climate challenge that we face. My only comment is just to emphasize that, you know, as we know, trade is driven by comparative advantage, and that comparative advantage, in our view, and also based on our research, is changing. And it's changing because we are seeing more in terms of a green comparative advantage. And we think that creates new opportunities, again, to drive the transition towards clean technologies, towards clean emissions, and so forth. So that's our main message today, and also throughout the COP, is that as we look towards the transition, new opportunities have been created, and the new opportunities allow us to think a lot more about green comparative advantage, which is about countries doing what they are green at, and relatively green at, I should say, and being relatively green at that will again drive new economic opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. The lady here in the first row.
Can you stand up, please? Thank you very much. I'm Shauna Core, the Daily Mirror in Ireland. I think this is a question that really hasn't been addressed so far, so really I want to put it to the three speakers on the panel. So for the second year running, it appears that the host country of COP has used that position to boost oil and gas deals. So I'd like to know from all three panel members, do you think that's acceptable? And do you think this in some way is fostering a bit of negativity around these talks and faith in the outcome? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think the messages that has been shared by the host country at different levels on that matter was exactly looking at the future. We are not denying our past, but we are looking at the future. All the messages that have been shared so far is exactly saying that Azerbaijan is transitioning its energy sector. Azerbaijan is putting a lot of effort, a lot of investment for that, and that is we should look to the future, not to the past. So therefore, whatever happened in the past, we are not denying this, but we should look further into the future. Thank you.
So no further, Mr. Steiner?
Let me just add one word, and I won't comment on a particular instance that I have read about, but I have no ability to judge. I think from a basic principle, clearly, COP presidencies, host countries, are in good faith hosting the world at a particular moment with the United Nations to negotiate. But let me say one word which I find sometimes a little troubling. This question of, you know, where would you host a COP? Are there countries that, you know, are by definition good hosts and others are bad hosts? I think in the United Nations, we maintain the principle that every nation, first of all, should have a right to be heard. Secondly, every nation should also be able to be listened to. When we convene meetings like this, let us also be a little bit more conscious of the fact that labels are not always the fairest way of describing a nation. Some of the largest oil producers have hosted COP in the past, and seemingly this seemed to be a perfectly acceptable phenomenon. So I would rather focus on the fact that we have countries that step forward, and this is a major effort that countries undertake in hosting a conference of the parties. And I think what we should judge a host by is, first of all, the integrity, to your point. Secondly, the ability of facilitating and convening the world around a topic that every 12 months the United Nations actually brings the world together around the table. If we did not have host countries, we would not be able to do so. And I think the world ultimately benefits from the fact that every country in a COP is put on the spotlight and under the spotlight here. Because we can allow citizens to actually judge whether their countries are contributing to solutions or whether they are walking away from being part of the solution. And I think these are some of the, let's say, criteria by which we need to judge ultimately whether COPs can contribute. And I only say this because in the run-up to every COP, we obviously focus on what we have not been able to accomplish, and we are far behind where the science has told us we need to be. what I sometimes regret is that a great deal of what is now happening, and I spoke to some of the numbers before, are forgotten. These painful negotiations over the years, the agreement to have NDCs, for countries to have a first and now a second generation of NDCs, these are actually the foundations on which we now see a clean energy revolution happening in the world. It would be good sometimes to report on that, because these are not instant coffee machines. The fact that it takes countries a number of years to turn NDCs into actually a significant change in the trajectory of their energy matrix and investments matters. This is why Europe last year could reduce its emission footprint by 8%, and many other statistics that we could cite here now. So I think every COP will have its controversies. Every country has its own past, and you just spoke to it, Mr. Rafiev. To me, the more important question is, this COP is not about Azerbaijan. This COP is about the world being able to take the Paris Agreement and move forward together. Maybe a country will leave that negotiation. I think we have seen over the last 28 COPs that this process is robust, resilient, it can stand turbulence, and the world has actually used it. Even if it was slow, it could have done it faster. And as I think we all realize, the cost of now having to act ever faster has gone up. But we still have not only a UN Framework Convention, we have a Paris Agreement, and we have remarkable numbers beginning to show the transitions that are happening. I thought I would just offer that as context, because it is part of the story of the COP process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Let me underline with a few numbers that the world has come to Baku. So we have around 70,000 registered participants, 34,368 parties, 13,275 observers, 3,618 media representatives, and a category technical staff, workforces, volunteers, is 13,977. So this adds up to 67,839. Thank you very much for today. Looking very much forward to seeing all of you tomorrow, same time, same place. Thank you.